Welcome, everyone, to the 25th episode of the TechForge podcast. I am your host for the evening, Dynamo Ned, and I am joined, as always, by my two intrepid co-hosts, Jason and Hunter.
What's up, Ned? What's up, Hunter?
Oh, just in a mobile state.
Yes, Hunter is doing some field testing of his mobile studio setup. Or at least that's the official excuse we're using.
Yep. And the video camera kind of lost video feed, so I'm just on audio.
Otherwise known as Protoss mode?
Pretty much.
Protoss mode engaged.
Protoss Dark Templar mode. That's it. Because I'm invisible.
You should put racing stripes on your Protoss. Make it like a GT Protoss.
Yeah.
If you could figure out how to put dual exhaust on your GT Protoss, that would be kind of scary.
Yeah.
Now I want to do a Protoss mod for a PC.
That'd be pretty awesome, actually.
I'm sure someone's done it already, but...
Yeah.
Well...
You could probably do a Protoss carrier.
Probably.
If you get the right case, or at least build an ATX or micro ATX. And then, like, somebody made a Lego ship. So it's not like it's...
Oh, I'm sure it's doable.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, we have quite a bit to talk about in this week's podcast. So let's jump straight into the short tech news. The first one...
We didn't want to have the silly more banter?
Well, it's not that I mind silly banter. It's just, I know it's rather late when we're recording this, and we've got about 16 topics to cover tonight, so...
That's true. That's true.
Gotta get to it.
All right. The first one is something that dropped just a few hours before we set out to record, and that is that AMD's boss of their Radeon Technologies group, Mr. Mike Rayfield, has signaled that he is planning to retire at the end of the year. Now, you may remember that after the departure of Raja Kaduri to join Intel's graphics group, it was the leadership for RTG, for the Radeon Technologies Group, was handed over to Michael J. Rayfield. And today it was announced that he is planning to retire. This first article we're discussing from is from WCCF Tech, and they have a source who says, quote, Rayfield was disengaged and very superficial. He would delete all his emails each week that he could not get around to reading and would never work weekends or after 5 p.m. He would pontificate in an abrasive manner and couldn't remember any names of his peers.
Interesting.
And it goes on to describe some other things that were going on, allegedly, that seemed to be the reason for this official retirement. But AMD's official response to this leak was that they denied the above statement and that it was Mike's choice to leave the company based on his own personal choice to retire, to spend more time with his family, and has nothing to do with his performance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course they're going to say that. I mean...
Right, it's standard HR boilerplate. But...
Yep.
The point being that, we've talked about in the past the talent war that's going on between AMD, Intel, and NVIDIA, where it seems like the same graphics people keep rotating between the companies and are constantly getting poached from each other's bullpens.
Yeah, so, it'd be kind of funny to see another article in 2 weeks saying Mike Rayfield is now with Intel.
or NVIDIA.
True. But if this type of work performance is actually real, I don't know.
And it's not like he came in with no background. He originally came to AMD from Micron.
Hmm.
Oh, really? Okay.
So, I mean, he obviously had performed well enough. And apparently, before serving at Micron, Rayfield had served as, get this, the mobile business unit manager for NVIDIA and was crucial in getting the team together that created the Tegra chip.
Ah,
Oh, really?
that's been extremely successful for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Tegra, Tegra 2.
And its derivatives like the Tegra X1, the Tegra K1.
Nintendo Switch.
Yep.
The
The Nintendo Switch
Sony
is
had a
using a
portable-
Tegra variant.
Yeah, Sony had a portable, like a PSP or something like that.
Yeah, they had the PSP.
It didn't last that long, but
No.
and a PS
Ironically,
Vita.
Yeah.
yeah,
And-
ironically, the PSP and the PS Vita were basically like the Nintendo DS, but them trying to shrink down PlayStation games to a small screen didn't really go over too well with gamers.
Yeah, and they're dealing with a heavyweight Game Boy, right?
Yeah,
So, and now I
Was
guess DS, but
the games probably weren't tailored efficiently. They weren't really graphic. They were like decent. Because I had a friend who had one. Actually, he said that Final Fantasy, whatever it was, on the PSP or PS Vita, whichever one he had, looked actually pretty good and was fun. But I think gamers from going from the PlayStation controller to the um, sort of um, strict, sort of like the Switch controls where you can't take them off, the Joy-Cons, can't take them off, that probably may have messed with people. It was layout was kind of like the PlayStation controller with the joysticks and the buttons, but I don't think I've heard that it was, like I said, didn't really go over too well with gamers. For whatever reason. I mean, it's mobile gaming, so
yeah,
I think that Nintendo would just had the market for that more so than PlayStation when they try to get into it.
it's Nintendo's market to lose, honestly. Portable
Yeah.
gaming.
Yeah,
They'll have things to kind of intercede in there, but not really do any damage to their market share. Like, all the little mobile pies you can get, and like the cell phones and stuff like that.
yeah,
Tablets now, I guess, but
Yeah, I mean, Nintendo knows that between the Switch and the 3DS and the successor to the 3DS that they're working on,
right.
they pretty much have the mobile and mobile to console market locked down.
oh yeah, yeah. Thank you, Game Boy. That's pretty much theirs.
And ironically, was it some other company that came out with the DS first called the Game & Watch?
I don't know.
Well, technically, Game & Watch was
Or was
Game
it
& Watch
Nintendo?
was Nintendo's attempt to capitalize on the early Crystal LCD displays.
Oh, okay. And that didn't really go over too well in its time because it was ahead of its time as far as a video I saw on like describing it.
Yeah, the original Game & Watches were fairly popular in Japan, but not really much elsewhere.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How old is that, though? I mean,
Game & Watch was the late 70s, early 80s.
oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
And it looks exactly like a DS.
Seriously?
Yes.
It's
how do you call it a watch? That's a big device.
Because the top screen was the game, the bottom screen was like readouts and stuff. So that was the watch part.
Gotcha.
Because you don't game on the bottom screen. The bottom screen would be like your ammo, your health bar, probably your map, and then if you're playing like Metroid, you'd be actually going through the levels on the top screen.
Gotcha.
So yeah, somehow we got to there from AMD's head of RTG leaving, but
Yeah. Rabbit holes.
Anyway, AMD's not the only one with some late-breaking issues. This is another article, this one from Tom's Hardware. Intel continues ticking backwards with new B365 chipset. We talked about a while back how Intel, for some of their chipsets, were moving back to a 22 nanometer process. And in particular for their H310C chipset, due to the fact that they were maxed out on 14 nanometer production. And so this new B365 chipset is apparently the B360 chipset, but once again moved back to the 22 nanometer process.
So, kind of reading into that, I mean, honestly, it's a non-Z chipset. Like, as long as you plug it in and it just works. I mean,
yeah.
But it looks like the B365 does support up to 20 PCIe lanes,
which is an improvement.
Which is over the 12 that the 360 supports. It also supports 2 more USB ports on the 365 versus the 360. However, the 360 does have USB 3.1 and integrated wireless, where the 365 does not. So, there's a few trade-offs here and there. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's really that big of a deal, honestly.
And I think that's probably the reason Intel decided to do it with that chipset is they know this is a chipset that's mostly going to make its way into office machines, into low-end office workstations at most. You know, yes, there are people who I have seen build gaming machines around a B360 chipset. And there are B360 gaming boards out there. But they're not the type of board that you're going to put a high-end gaming chip into.
Well, I mean, if someone's putting a K part on one of these, unless they got the K part for some screaming deal, like somebody kicked it off the back of a semi-truck or something, it just
makes no sense.
No, there's no sense at all. It's like trying to put a Ryzen in an Intel motherboard. Like,
unless you just wanted the higher base clock speed, but you didn't want the higher heat production of a K-SKU. I could see that, but that would still be a waste of money.
That's kind of a non-deal, because, I mean, you could take a non-K and put a decent cooler on it, and it's going to auto-boost anyway.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, you could put like a 120 AIO or like a really nice air cooler on it, and it's going to...
I forgot about the turbo boost.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, anyway, with stuff like this, they know that this is mostly going to be going into cheap motherboards for OEMs.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's a big deal for Intel. It's when we start hearing about that they're moving their H370 or their Z390 chipsets back to a previous chipset architecture or back to a previous process node that we need to be worried.
Yeah, if they start talking about like moving i7 parts to 22 nanometer,
Which, don't get me wrong, 22 nanometer, there were some good parts on there. Pretty sure most of the Haswell parts were 22 nanometer.
All of them were.
Mm-hmm.
Devil's Canyon and the standard Haswell parts were, yeah. But that was a completely different time, though. I mean,
Right.
yeah, AMD had 8-core parts, but they weren't real 8-core parts. So there were quad cores that did 8 cores with some tricks.
And
they were not good.
And as we're going to talk about here in a little bit when we discuss the information from Intel's Architecture Day, Intel is planning to get their 10 nanometer plans off the ground in 2019 that will hopefully alleviate some of these problems with their 14 nanometer production. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. All right. Oh, this is a nice one. This is also from Tom's Hardware. The first AMD Ryzen 3000 series benchmarks have leaked, but not for the parts you may be thinking about. No, these are for the mobile Ryzen 3000 Picasso, being the code name, laptop parts. The APUs that will be the successor to the Ryzen 2000U series that consisted of the Ryzen 3 2200U, the Ryzen 5 2500U, and the Ryzen 7 2700U.
It'd be nice to see how these compare benchmark-wise versus the 2000Us. You know what I mean?
It would. Unfortunately, this leak did not contain that information.
Yeah. I bet they're pretty similar. I mean, they're good parts, but...
According to the leak, which comes from the well-known and prolific leaker Toom Apisak on Twitter, the lineup is going to consist of at least 5 SKUs. The Ryzen 3 3200U, the Ryzen 3 3300U, the Ryzen 5 3500U, and Ryzen 7 3700U. And another part, which was only labeled 300U, but is assumed to likely be an Athlon part.
Yeah, that looked like a dual core, I think, right? No SMT.
That's the thinking, but again, there wasn't any data provided for that part.
There's not a 200U though, is there?
Well, the 3200U is a 2-core, 4-thread part with a base clock of 2.6 gigahertz.
Well,
that apparently achieved roughly between a 2187 and a 3588 in Geekbench, single core. And 4524 and 6924 in Geekbench multi-core.
I'm not sure what that means in the overall scheme of things.
Well, that's the problem. Geekbench is not a common benchmark used among enthusiasts.
Yeah.
It's used in a lot of CPU validation, and it's popular among the Mac user set because Geekbench is cross-platform.
So it's a way of comparing.
Yep.
Gotcha.
The more interesting leak to me was the Ryzen 5 3500U, which is a 4-core, 8-thread part with a base clock of 2.1 gigahertz. And they didn't specify a boost clock, but if it's consistent with the 2500U, we could expect something in the range of 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz.
Which, that's not bad. I mean, anybody that's used these Zen Plus parts that are at the mid 3 gigahertz range, that's pretty decent.
Yeah. And here's the big difference. They estimate, or the leak showed Geekbench 4.1 multi-core scores of 11,284. Now compare that to the 6,924 from the 3200U. That's almost perfect double scaling.
Really?
Well, yeah, 6,924 to 11,284. That's what? Almost 90% scaling?
That's impressive. I wonder what they did to achieve that.
No idea. But again, of course, this is a leak from a well-known and fairly well-respected Taiwanese leaker, but it is a leak. So, of course, take it with a grain of salt. However, remember, AMD is supposed to be announcing some new CPUs at CES at the beginning of January. So keep these in mind.
Can't wait for that leak, or I can't wait for CES now. After that leak came out.
Yeah.
Oh.
Which I was almost going to include that Adored TV put out a new video basically pushing back against those who were saying that his leak was too good to be true, by basically showing corroborating evidence that he got from additional sources and pointing out how the assumptions that were being made were, well, had been shown to be false through past actions by AMD.
Well, and to further corroborate Adored TV's claims, if you look up process nodes and their previous generation of architecture, and you get kind of an idea for the engineering S-curve, when you do the math, the performance that's listed in those slides is very possible, especially with the architectural improvements that they had mentioned. They had something earlier this year, like a month ago maybe, where they were talking about the process improvements for EPYC, for the new line of EPYC chips. So when you look at that, some of that's going to fail over into Ryzen, like the back end and the front end stuff. So when you do the math, it's easily within the realm of possibility moving to 7 nanometer.
Right.
I don't think people understand this is a 50% shrink. Like, it's twice as small. I don't know.
Well, I think where some of the disbelief has come in was with the prices. And yes, the prices he listed, you know what? AMD could change those prices the instant before they go live.
Oh, yeah.
And so, but he made an excellent point where after putting that leak out there with those prices, his sources got back with him and said, yeah, those prices, those are more of goals than actual set in stone prices.
Mm-hmm.
And so he made the point that, you know, by you all saying it's too good to be true, guess what? You've made it too good to be true.
That's true. That's true.
Yep.
And honestly, there's not going to be a counter. If these parts come out like what's been leaked, there's not much competition there because AMD is finally at clock speed parity with Intel. So
unless Intel can pull a miracle with its 10 nanometer, and given its very troubled history, I wouldn't bet on it.
I wouldn't either. I would say they're at least 6 months out from January, from next month. I'd say they're at least 6 months out from any kind of a rebuttal. They'll have competitive parts, well, like with the 8 core and possibly this 10 core they've got coming out, but they're competing against a 5 gigahertz 12 core and a 5 gigahertz 16 core and nearly a 5 gigahertz 8 core. So,
which would render a lot of their high-end desktop practically obsolete.
Pretty much. And if they get, because right now one of the main advantages that Intel has in the i9 HEDT space is the higher clock speeds.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with 7 nanometer, that advantage goes away. So Intel is gonna, at least from just a pure competitive advantage, they're not gonna really have it.
Well, regardless of the hardware you decide to pick for your PC, we all have to run an operating system on it. And most of us probably use Windows 10 because, well, if you're watching this channel, you're probably into gaming. And although my beloved Linux has much improved in its gaming situation of late, thanks largely to Steam's Proton compatibility later,
yes, sir.
Windows 10 is still pretty much your only option for gaming with most games. Unfortunately, Windows 10 has a bit of a spotty history when it comes to its updates. And it looks like that reputation is going to be even further soiled by the fact that Windows 10, if you hit that check for updates button in the wrong part of the month, guess what? You're getting beta updates.
Oh, which can totally break your machine.
Like the October update.
Yep.
Yeah, the famous October update.
Mm-hmm.
So this comes from PC World, but I saw this on several places. I just liked Mark Hackman's article here. Basically, in a blog post this week, Microsoft revealed that those users who click the Check for Updates button, Settings, Update and Security, Windows Update, Check for Updates, were opting in to testing new Windows features on a one-time basis if they happen to click the button during the 3rd and 4th weeks of the month.
That's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard.
Apparently, they have a schedule of updates which they mark A, B, C, and D. And if you click that button between the 3rd and 4th weeks of the month, you wind up with the block C and D updates, which apparently are past beta, but they are not ready for release.
Mm.
That's so wrong on so many different levels. Ethical, quality, professional. I don't know why.
What they really need to do is have a testing base at their company to test updates before they send it out to everybody. That's what companies do.
It's called,
at least I know one company that does that.
That's QA, QC, man.
Yeah.
Quality assurance, quality control.
Basically, what it's sounding like is, when Windows 10 came out, Windows gave the option to choose between the stable updates, the fast ring, or excuse me, you had stable, you had the slow ring, where you got beta updates, but at a slower pace. And then you had the fast ring, which is where you got new updates practically every week. But, of course, introducing potential problems for system stability. Well, it seems that those no longer apply, and that basically if you hit the button to update at the wrong point of the month, guess what? You're getting beta updates regardless. So,
surprise!
And unknowing people would do that. Like people who have been told that updating your computer with Windows updates is a good thing to keep your computer safe from security risks. And basically, they're just falling into a trap.
Yeah, and these are the people that you don't want to help. These are the people that call their keyboards a clicker. Or when they go on the internet, they're going on there to read their stories.
Or also downloading toolbars to their browser that makes their computer slow, and then they complain that the computer is slow.
And they think the USB icon looks like a cactus.
What?
They call it a cactus. Yeah.
Or the individuals who want you to fix the Google. I've gotten that
Yes.
one before.
Well,
I need you to fix the Google.
I know somebody who said, please download the Google Maps. I'm like, it's a website. You don't download them.
What?
I mean,
Yeah.
you can download offline versions, but
Yeah.
it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes. So if you don't already have your Windows set up to do automatic updates, and you do updates manually, just be aware you may get yourself an update that could bork your machine. As some users of the Surface Book 2 found out in late November when they picked up a beta patch that caused their Surface Book 2s to crash with blue screens of death, throwing a thread not handled exception, which Microsoft rescinded the patch and told affected users how to fix it. But at that point, the damage was done, and it made obvious what the whole problem is. Microsoft is essentially using you and I as beta testers for their software. Software that we have paid for to be stable.
Which is a really dumb policy or whatever, because normally companies would not do that. Like Jason and I know, they would go through a beta testing team or a QA testing team before they send it out to everybody. But Microsoft apparently is too big to do that.
Microsoft, we're going to open you up to a new term. It's called user acceptance testing. That's where you showcase the product in front of an audience.
Yeah, I mean, there's other companies that aren't IT that have that kind of thing where they have they ask people if they want to get into a survey, and then they go in and do public quality control or quality testing, but with a small group. And it's so funny that Microsoft uses everybody who buys their operating system as the testers when they have an insider program. I mean, I'm in Windows Insider program. I don't really pay attention to it, but
Right.
I'm in it. So I could tell them, hey, like I should have told them when Windows 10 upgrade from Windows 7 bricked my Intel NUC, that their upgrade was terrible or there was buggy or whatever. So if you are in the Windows Insider, you can tell them. I don't know if that exists, if the feedback part exists for non-insider people.
No idea. But there's other frameworks that can be used and leveraged. Movies do it all the time.
Yeah.
Pre-screening.
Oh, yeah.
There's game alpha testing, beta
Yeah.
testing. Releasing it to a complete third party.
Alpha testing, beta testing.
Yeah.
Closed beta, open beta.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they did mention in the blog post that the PC World article is based off of that the Windows Insider testing is supposed to be those B releases, what you and I would most of the time call Patch Tuesday. Apparently, the C and D release blocks aren't even supposed to be open to Windows Insiders, but even if you're not on a Windows Insider ring, the B ring, if you go in as a normal user on the A block, the normal release block, apparently you can pick up those C and D block updates if you're not careful. And that, to me, is beyond just...
It's unethical to me. Because you're not warning people about it until somebody in the IT media world breaks the story.
Right.
So you're not preparing people.
Even sociopaths can tell you this is not ethical, man.
Yeah,
So
the whole
I
thing strikes me as just, this is the lazy way to do it, and you know what? We just, Microsoft for some time has been saying that they're moving to a faster and more agile development environment. As someone who has worked in agile development environments, this is not how you do agile correctly.
No. Usually with agile work environments, you have better quality. And you've got more, you're closer to the customer, right? So you've got quicker feedback. And it gets fixed faster.
And I remember when before Microsoft was actually forced to put in optional updating when they had it mandatory. It broke a woman's business because she was putting out her products for a big order, and all her computers got updated at the same time, and it killed her business for that day. And she sued Microsoft. And from that, Microsoft decided to go from automatic updates to optional updates for Windows 10. This was back when Windows 10 was just starting out.
Yeah, I remember that particular lawsuit.
Well, she's probably not the only person whose business was impacted.
Oh, no. There's been others. Wasn't there like some countries that sued Microsoft?
It wouldn't surprise me. I don't remember the specifics, though. So, Microsoft, please, just stop using your customers as beta testers.
Seriously.
I know some of the game companies get away with that and call it early access, but it doesn't work for operating systems. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they should use the NASA monkeys as beta testers.
Microsoft, just please hire a QA team.
Yeah, me and Hunter. Come on.
Yeah.
Right now.
All right.
More better testing, yeah.
We know what we're doing.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So that covers all the short topics I wanted to hit, and we've already spent 40 minutes on that. So the big topic for the week, of course, was Intel's Architecture Day that they had earlier, where they discussed some of their upcoming technologies and how they're going to impact their CPU and GPU production going forward. In particular, there were 4 big points that they discussed. The first being their Sunny Cove CPU that is going to be based on their next generation architecture. Second, they talked about their 11th generation integrated graphics and how those relate to their Z or XE GPUs. They haven't made clear how you're supposed to pronounce that. And they also talked about their new 3D packaging technology called Fervoros. And how that can be used to build up CPUs, GPUs, and other dies using a 3D strategy instead of a traditional 2D one. It's essentially an extension of their EMIB technology that we saw last year with the Hades Canyon NUC.
Mm-hmm.
Where they put a i7-8807 with a AMD Vega GPU, all on the same EMIB die. Or the same EMIB substrate, I guess would be more correct. And finally, they also talked about, well, technically they had Raja Koduri come up and give a Q&A where there was a lot more Qs than there were As.
Oh, yeah. No one knows anything about the new GPU lines coming out. So, absolutely.
Other than they're named X raised to the E. No, really, that's their branding. X superscript E. But I get ahead of myself. So down below, you'll find a link to the one tab link that contains all the articles that we're discussing today. There you'll find link to the Intel newsroom where they had their announcement that has all the data from this, as well as the fact sheet that kind of summarizes it all into nice, easily digestible chunks. But I honestly thought that the best representation and the best summary and explanation that I found was a non-text article about Architecture Day. There, they broke it down piece by piece. They broke it into 9 pages. So that's how much was covered.
9 non-tech, 9 on-tech pages. Oof, that's a read, man. That's like,
yeah.
You read a section, then you go take a break. Then you come back, you read another section, and you go take a break. So it takes a lot to dive. I mean, they deep dive everything.
And so that's why I included a link to the article, but I'm actually not going to be referencing it a whole lot because otherwise we'd be here a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But they in particular, their deep dive into Sunny Cove and how it advances over Skylake in its refreshes, because let's face it, that's what Coffee Lake is.
Mm-hmm.
And how their next generation graphics, their Gen 11 integrated graphics, are supposed to offer a 50% performance improvement over their current generation ones. I thought those were particularly good. And they also discussed that Intel was able to demonstrate an actual Ice Lake 10 nanometer Xeon there at Architecture Day. And so that in particular is the one piece I'd encourage you to take a look at to get a sneak peek into what the Ice Lake CPUs on the desktop are likely to look like.
Good. I'm really excited about this, honestly. Both the CPU and the GPU stuff. We need a competitive Intel just as much as we need a competitive AMD and NVIDIA.
Indeed. I mean, while it's kind of nice to see Intel on the back foot for the first time in almost 15 years, it's just as bad to see, anyone who remembers the Athlon XP days remembers the problems that came up as AMD remained dominant in the market for about 3 to 4 years in the early to mid 2000s. And how their prices steadily creeped up, much like we've talked about the way Intel's prices have been steadily creeping up for the last 5 to 6 years or so.
Well, any time a manufacturer is as dominant as both of them were in their respective markets in those time frames, they become stagnant. You don't see much improvement. Like AMD had some stuff in the pipeline, but they were executing really slow. Eventually, they moved to dual core, memory controller on the chip, all that stuff. That was really great. But then Intel came out with Core 2 and then just rode that wave until Ryzen came out. And how long has Intel been at a quad core part? Since what, 2010? 2009, somewhere in there?
They introduced a 4-core 8-thread part as the top end of their mainstream chipset, with the original Core series, with the Core i7-87, the Core i7 875K.
And so essentially, and then Kaby Lake came out early 2017. So I want to say that's 8 or 9 years, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's roughly late 2009, early 2010 to early 2017, where a 4-core, 8-thread part was the high end of the mainstream.
Right. And it wasn't until Ryzen came along and really shook things up. So I wouldn't say AMD's in a dominant position yet, but until Intel can counter Zen 2, I believe it's realistic to think that Zen 2 will easily outperform Coffee Lake. Maybe not easily, but be dominant in most workloads.
The key thing I think we'll have to look into, and we'll have to be on the lookout for, is will Sunny Cove deal with the fact that although Intel's parts clock really high, once you start going over 6 or 8 cores, they get really hot.
Well, that's at their current process. Sunny Cove is supposed to be 10 nanometer. We won't know how it behaves until it actually debuts and people get their hands on it and start playing around with it. So I wouldn't really speculate on Sunny Cove on how Sunny Cove behaves and performs over Coffee Lake. That is definitely true of Coffee Lake, but I don't know. We'll have to see what happens.
But speaking of Sunny Cove, I wanted to share this real quick with everyone.
Oh, yeah?
This is the CPU core roadmap that Intel showed off at Intel Architecture Day. Notice that you have 2019 here. You have 2019 here. And they show Sunny Cove. And notice what they're talking about. Single-threaded performance, new ISA, improved scalability. In other words, they're shooting for even higher single-threaded performance, but also being able to scale it better, meaning being able likely to get more cores on the same die.
Which a smaller process node would allow them to do that.
Right.
But I wonder if there's more to the scalability improved quote there. I wonder if there's more to that. Like AMD, for example, is moving to a more modular design. So,
right. And we know that already Intel was hitting the limits of their ring bus architecture with the Core i9-9900K.
Mm-hmm.
It's why in their high-end desktop parts they moved to that mesh interconnect, which in theory should have been better, but as we know, introduced some latency issues that made it worse in certain workloads than the ring bus parts.
Well, there's just a lot of evidence in their mainstream parts and their high-end desktop parts that it just really seems like they're on the very edge of what they can produce anymore with 14 nanometer. They've gotten as much out of that process node as they possibly can.
And they also talk about how in 2020 they're looking to introduce a refresh essentially called Willow Cove, where they will redesign the cache, optimize the transistors, and introduce new security features, followed in 2021 by Golden Cove, which will further improve single-thread performance, focus on artificial intelligence performance, and this was the thing I found interesting, network and 5G performance. So they're talking about Golden Cove almost as if it were a mobile part.
That's interesting.
And they also talk about they're continuing the Atom lineup with Tremont, Gracemont, and Nextmont.
Hmm.
And so, to be honest, I almost wasn't aware that Atom still existed.
Me either.
Because Intel's Atom series, they were really dominant in the early 2010s.
Netbooks and
yeah,
super
my
small
mom
form
had
factor.
had a netbook with an Atom N455 in it, and which, by the way, that thing was. Oh, let me stop sharing this. That thing was. It was terrible under Windows. I remember she used to turn it on and have to leave it on for hours at a time to update because that little N455 would just sit there and thrash away at updates because it was working with a slow 250 gigabyte hard drive, and so it was constantly having to send stuff in the memory to the hard drive and then stuff from the hard drive to the memory, and it only had 1 gig of memory to work with. So the CPU would sit there thrashing between sending stuff to the memory and then having to immediately send it back to the hard drive. It was a mess.
Windows Vista?
No, Windows 7 Basic.
Oh, 1 gig of RAM. Yeah.
Even after I upgraded it for her to 2 gigs of RAM, it was too much for it to take. Amazingly enough, after I loaded Linux on it, after she moved to a different laptop, it just doesn't care. Under Linux Mint 19,
Just fine?
works just fine.
2 gigs of RAM?
Although, I did run into an odd issue with it. Apparently, there was a very similar model that year that came with a keyboard backlight. However, the particular model she had doesn't. Well, there is a long-standing Linux kernel bug where on Dell laptops with backlights, if the backlight sensor is not present, then the system will refuse to boot. But
the backlight broke my laptop. The backlight broke my laptop.
But if you know about it, it's literally a one-line command line fix. It's literally editing a single line in a single file to tell it to not activate the backlight.
Wow.
Because if it does try to activate the backlight, it will hang and it will crash. But after that one fix, it's fine.
I had an Atom-based smartphone for a while. The Asus Zenfone 2. Because it was one of the first phones to come out with 4 gigs of RAM. And you could get it for $200. And that phone was awesome. I love that thing. I had that thing forever. Till Utility Man broke my screen and I couldn't get a battery replacement anyway. But yeah, it was fine. It was based off of 22 nanometer Atom, but it still worked great. I love it.
Those are also in the Pocket PCs, the ones that just plug into the HDMI port.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah, they have like Cherry Trail Atom is in like I forgot what the name of it, but it was one that's like looks like a phone. It's like the size of a phone, and it had I think 2 gig RAM or in a 4 gig RAM model.
Was that Intel's Compute Stick?
No, it's a different. It's a different company, basically like the Compute Stick, but it's a different company. It was on Indiegogo, I think.
It wasn't the Kangaroo portable PC, was it?
No, it's not that one.
The Kangaroo portable.
No, that's literally what it was called. It was the Kangaroo portable PC.
Yeah, it reminds me of Captain Kangaroo for some reason.
Okay. So screen share time again.
Oh, it's the Occult series.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember that one. So I'll present this to everybody again. This is them showing the differences between Skylake and Sunny Cove. So notice that what they're doing is it looks like they're introducing a whole lot more into the integer core. Notice the number of additional registers here in the integer core versus Skylake. And they're also introducing some new arithmetic into the VEC encoder. They're having a bigger... Sorry, go ahead.
I have no idea what that means, but go ahead.
VEC is the video encoder.
Ah, that's interesting.
And so you'll notice that they have multiples here. That previously they had the single RS and then one over here for load store. Now they have broken it into multiple branching paths. So some neat stuff there with the way they've rebuilt Sunny Cove compared to Skylake. In particular, they point to the fact that memory support has increased from 48 bits to 57 bits, which means the difference from having up to 64 terabytes of RAM versus now up to 4 petabytes of RAM.
That's crazy.
Obviously, we're nowhere near that point except in the supercompute space.
Yeah. Cluster, cluster, cluster.
So they call their strategy with Sunny Cove deeper, wider, and smarter. And you could see that in the way the architecture was put together a minute ago with the multiple RSs versus the 2 in the past. Now there's 4. By going deeper, they're able to increase parallelism. This is their words. Wider, meaning the new cores will be able to execute more operations in parallel. And smarter in that they contain additional encoders and instruction sets that make them better at certain tasks like cryptography. In particular, they pointed to AES 256 encryption, where they did a 7-zip encode using AES 256, and apparently on the Sunny Cove processor compared to a Coffee Lake equivalent, the 7-zip demonstration finished up to 75% faster. However, there is a catch. That version of 7-zip was specifically compiled for Sunny Cove's optimizations. So, again, take it with a little grain of salt. Which actually brings us to the next bit, which is their promise of up to 2 times better graphics with their 11th gen integrated GPUs. Basically, what Intel says they're shooting for with their 11th generation integrated GPU is twice the performance of the current generation Intel UHD integrated graphics, and that they will increase their Gen 11 GPUs from the 24 execution units on the UHD 640 up to 64 execution units. So they are...
What that means in terms of performance, though.
Well, I mean, considering that's almost 3 times as many execution units.
The number's impressive, but I mean,
they're claiming they're claiming that it is capable of, quote, up to 1 trillion floating point operations per second. Now, a teraflop of processing power sounds impressive. The first discrete GPU to hit a teraflop of processing power was the Radeon HD 4870.
Okay.
That was in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
So for an integrated GPU to match that level of performance is not a small accomplishment.
Well, how does that stack up to Vega 8 and Vega 11? I want to say. Isn't Vega 11 around 1.7 teraflops?
Something like that.
So Vega 8 would be less. So Vega 8's probably around a teraflop or 1.2 maybe.
Well, I was about to say, apparently, Intel believes their Gen 11 GPUs will be roughly on par with the Radeon Vega 8 GPU in the Ryzen 5 2500U.
Which, that's not a small feat. That's actually pretty impressive.
And if that is, in fact, the case, then that's really hard to argue with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Vega 8 in the Ryzen 5 2500U, if they're able to achieve that, more power to them. I know you can buy laptops with the Ryzen 5 2500U for about $400 right now. And
yeah, in fact, I was just on Dell's website. They've got decent pricing for 2500U laptops, honestly.
And so if Intel can achieve similar performance, then good on them.
Yeah, that means more competition, man. I'm all for that.
That wasn't the only GPU IP that they talked about, though. They also talked about moving forward from their Generation 11 integrated graphics. They talked about their codenamed Arctic Sound GPU architecture, only apparently Arctic Sound is no longer the code name. It is now Intel Z external graphics. And Z, in this case, apparently, or XE, or X raised to the E, because they were not clear on how it's supposed to be pronounced, is...
So I wonder what... You said external graphics?
Well, they say that it is going to be... Well, here. It might be easier to show than to tell.
It's like Protoss again.
So this is the image they shared right here about GPU IP scalability. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. There we go.
Okay, so this is more of a data processing type of technology.
Well, they claim that this architecture will be optimized from the integrated and entry level all the way up to data center optimized applications.
But they mentioned enthusiast in there.
Exactly.
I would be very skeptical of external graphics. So far, it doesn't work well. So far, all these little external boxes, they're nice looking, but the bottleneck back to the system under Thunderbolt, Thunderbolt's got a lot of bandwidth, but it still heavily bottlenecks anything that you put in those external boxes.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I think when they meant external, they probably likely meant not integrated or discrete. But
it would have to be essentially an external PCI Express technology.
Which DisplayPort kind of lets you do right now, and Thunderbolt kind of lets you do right now, but not really.
Not at
It's
PCIe X8 or X16.
No, it's times 4. And that's the problem. Until there's a successor for Thunderbolt that's capable of higher bandwidth, external graphics cards just, they don't hold up. But I just found that interesting that there's this, that they're talking about how this next generation architecture, this XE, is supposed to be a huge leap forward. And how it's supposed to be optimized. They're going to create variants that are client optimized, as they put it, which I think we can safely assume means consumer and gaming focused, versus data center optimized, compute performance focused.
So that's basically product stacks for both, which AMD and NVIDIA have. It's interesting. I'd really like to see if they can actually deliver on that.
Oh, and one other thing, they indicate that this will be built on a 10 nanometer node. So take that for what it is.
That's probably competitive with the TSMC 7 nanometer. If it's an Intel process technology, it would. And let's not forget the Turing is at 12 nanometer. So
right. And given that some of the insiders in the industry are saying that the transistor density of Intel's AMD's 7 nanometer is comparable to the transistor density of Intel's 10 nanometer, from what they've seen, it could be more competitive than we think.
Good. Actually thinking about it, it would be cool to see an external bus technology that would be comparable to internal PCIe. It would be very cool to see, because that would open the door to a lot of different devices being able to connect to a desktop class video card. I mean, how cool would it be? How cool would it be to say have a Vega 56 in an external box that has its own enclosed power supply and hook that up to a laptop?
Yeah, and I mean that's the fantasy that's offered by the current Ultrabook gaming books, like the Razer Blade Stealth or the Asus Zephyrus, or I'm not remembering any of the others at the moment, but these ideas of these gaming Ultrabooks that you can then hook up to an external GPU. I mean, I'd love to have a solid 13-inch Ultrabook that I could pop onto a dock at the end of the day and game as if it were my gaming tower.
Yeah, that'd be all right. Take it with you somewhere and take it home and put it into your docking station and boom. Probably works fine for professional applications, for CAD or whatever else would leverage a GPU, but it doesn't work well for content creation. I don't think. I could be wrong, or for gaming right now. But when that comes out, it'd be really cool if they could actually deliver. I will be optimistic.
And there was one last big technology that Intel talked about in depth at their architecture day, and that was their Foveros 3D die stacking tech. That's Foveros, for anyone wondering. So Foveros apparently allows various process nodes and various tech to be stacked on top of each other in different parts of a package. They showed this photo Let me share once again.
You gonna show the pop memory?
Yep.
Yeah, there it is, pop memory.
So they talk about the world's first hybrid x86 architecture.
Hybrid? Hybrid with what?
Well, the models that they showed had Intel Core CPUs along with Intel Atom CPU dies on the same package substrate.
Interesting.
You'll notice here in the photo, I'll zoom in again.
You have the power of Zoom, Ned.
Some have said that.
When did God give you the power of Zoom?
When Google invented Chrome.
Uh-huh.
And so you'll notice, in particular, P1274 compute and P1222 IO SoC. Now, this is interesting because we were talking about earlier how Intel had fallen back for their chipsets on their 22 nanometer process, the 22 FFL.
Mm-hmm.
Here, they're showing the 22 FFL being used as an IO and an SoC die that they're putting their P1274, which is their 10 nanometer process, on top of. And then that's all being connected to a package substrate with the POP memory on top, creating a 3D die stacking.
Yeah. That's interesting. Which, if package real estate, if silicone real estate on a package is a premium, this approach would work extremely well.
Well, notice what they're talking about here. An ultra-mobile form factor with a 12 millimeter by 12 millimeter by 1 millimeter size.
Mm-hmm.
And with 2 milliwatt standby power. That's getting in the range of, with 2 milliwatt standby power, that's getting in the range of phone SoCs.
That's interesting.
So,
makes you wonder. There's probably quite a few applications for that.
So, you remember last year they debuted their EMIB technology, which was basically an active interposer between a CPU die and the AMD GPU Vega die. So Foveros apparently takes this to the next level, where you have a package with an active interposer on top of it, and then you can put compute chips, memory, other modules like GPU units or dedicated compute units for, like, kind of like what NVIDIA is doing with their special compute units, their RT cores and their tensor cores. Imagine being able to do the same thing on a CPU die, where you have your traditional compute units, but you also have memory and, say, SoC parts like a modem for networking and 5G.
Be pretty interesting. It's like Intel Lego blocks, man.
Yeah, I think that's probably the fascinating part of the technology, is the fact that they're able to leverage their older process to act as a base for their newer ones, which helps alleviate the problems they've been having with their production, while also allowing them to leverage a well-known, well-used process. I mean, they specifically call it out, the P1222 process, as low-cost, low-leakage process for base die. I mean, like I said, 22 nanometer, they've been using it since 2014.
No, they've been using it since Ivy Bridge. Right?
You're right.
Yeah.
So they've been using it since 2012.
Yeah. Wow.
Because Sandy Bridge was the last of the 32 nanometer CPUs. Ivy Bridge was 22 nanometers. And then Haswell was the first. Ivy Bridge was basically 22 nanometer Sandy Bridge.
Yeah.
And then Haswell was the first real new architecture on 22 nanometer.
Yep. And then Broadwell was supposed to be Haswell on 14. But never quite came around. So,
well, it did. It just got a very limited release.
It was like a month, 2 months.
Yeah. Anyone remember the i5 5575C and the i7's 5775C?
Yep. Because I remember a friend of mine telling me, "I'm gonna wait till Broadwell. And then when the i7 part came out, I was like, dude, it doesn't perform as well as the 4790. Might as well wait till Skylake now." So,
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that covers most of the things that were in Intel's Architecture Day. There was, like I said, go back to that AnandTech article. Take a deep dive into it. They go into a lot more depth than we possibly could here.
Okay.
One other thing I wanted to quickly highlight, and again, it's this is again a release that just happened today when we're recording this. Was AMD released their Radeon Software Adrenaline 2019 edition.
Oh yeah.
And I have to step away for a moment, but Jason, you had some things you wanted to discuss about this driver, so I will hand it off to you for a moment.
Oh my gosh. You should have told me. All right. Well, I'm by far nowhere near a subject matter expert on this new driver update, but what I have to say is there's a lot of really awesome stuff in here. Now, I don't know what's new versus old completely, but I've been playing around with this all day, and gosh, I wish I could share my screen, but some of the coolest updates is there's a Radeon settings advisor now, which scans your configuration and will recommend certain settings for you based on your configuration and how you use it. And it will automatically optimize your setup for you and make it either a little faster, give you better quality. What I mean by quality is just a better overall screen image of whatever you're doing if you're playing games or whatever. My favorite part of this new driver set is in the new global or the what is it the watt the global Wattman tool. Now I got a Vega 56 over the summer and I fell in love with this card. Just there's so many possibilities, endless configurations. And really, there's tons and tons of performance on tap if you're willing to get your hands a little bit dirty, meaning overclocking, tweaking, flashing some BIOSes here and there. Now, a lot of this stuff will void your warranty, but stock, it performs really well. I think one of my favorite aspects to the new Global Wattman is the addition of proper fan curves. See, before you had in the old Global Wattman, you had a minimum and a maximum RPM rate.
Mm-hmm.
And you had no way of really kind of controlling that. The driver basically did it for you. Or you'd have to go to a third-party application to do that, like MSI Afterburner or EVGA's Precision tool. But now built right in the tool, this is super handy. I wish I could share my screen here with you, but built right in the tool, you've got a fan curve just like any other fan curve that you'll get with like a fan controller or a motherboard BIOS or like a nice software application. You can set your fan curve based off of the temp of the processor. And I'm moving to open water cooling here pretty soon. And I've taken a Morpheus 2 cooler recently to my reference Vega 56 card. And while it's been really awesome, I've been pushing it to such an extent that it actually shut down on me because the VRMs overheated. So I've had to really back off of that. But this fan curve has allowed me to configure it and fine tune it a little bit better because I can set a minimum fan curve for my fans to be at 42% rate, which is like right around an RPM rate of like 1100 just to start off with. And that keeps my board really, really cool. And then I can just moderately increase it. And this has been the most valuable feature for me on this new driver set. But I know that if you get into the release notes, there's all kinds of performance improvements over old and new titles. I don't know what that is. I've just been testing this in 2 games all day. And honestly, I don't see any performance improvement, but I'm not taking hard data looks either. I'm not looking at minimum and maximum frame rates and all that stuff. I just wanted to get into the tool and see how it worked. There also seems to be, I could be wrong here, but I've been taking some recordings today, and I've got to say that over the past 6 months, Relive has really improved. I think that this is hands and away so much better than Shadowplay at this point. I've been doing a lot of recording today of something that our clan or our gaming club, one of our gaming club members wanted to take captures of, and there are so many options in here for Relive. Once you get beyond, setting up your save folders and stuff like that, you can set up all kinds of different hotkeys, different video and audio capturing devices. There's lots of streaming options now. You can stream directly to all kinds of different platforms: Facebook, Mixer, Stage 10, Twitch, YouTube. There's all kinds of platforms in here. You can set up a custom stream. You have different settings for streaming resolution, bitrate, FPS. You can go with one of their custom profile with one of their standard profiles or set up a custom one. Recording in here, all kinds of recording options. I don't want to talk your ears off, but I think they release like a major update once a year. This is a really nice update.
I know I had just recently updated to the 18.12.1 drivers, and these are the 18.12.2 drivers. But usually this second update at the end of December is the big update for the year. And from what I'm reading, from what you're saying, it sounds like I definitely need to download it for my RX 480s and see what it does.
Well, over the last year, now I've been an NVIDIA user for much longer than I've been an AMD user, but people can't say that and I know one of the long-standing arguments is, well, NVIDIA just has better drivers. That is not the case anymore. AMD drivers are far and away more feature dense. I think they're more stable, but don't get me wrong. NVIDIA drivers are just as stable, probably. But when it comes to features, NVIDIA can't hold a candle to AMD drivers. AMD drivers are just far superior when it comes to features.
Also, I don't have to sign up for an account if I want to update my drivers.
Right. With the GeForce Experience, you have to log in with Google or have an email or social media account. You don't have to do that here. That's a big selling point right there. So yeah, I mean, this is a big, massive, great update. My hats off to the new global Wattman features, because my favorite thing isn't gaming, it's tweaking. I'll be playing with this for a long time. I'll be playing with this for a long time. Especially after I get the open loop finally. Don't get me started on that. But
so basically, if you're running a Radeon graphics card and it uses any of the GCN architecture from the 7000 series up, get this update. It's worth it.
Absolutely. Hands down. It's fantastic.
All right. So that brings us to the end of our news, but we have a few deals we'd like to share with you this week. Actually, several more than usual, because as we were doing some of our before-show discussion, we ran into a couple of deals unexpectedly. So this first one, at first I didn't think was as good of a deal as it actually is. This is a Rosewell Spectra C100 case.
Oh, yeah.
This, let me get a picture on screen. All right, so this case, which, let me get the photo up here. It comes with 4 fans, 4 double blue LED ring fans, the ones shown. A budget case that comes with 4 fans, 4 120 millimeter fans pre-installed is almost unheard of.
Yeah, I mean, at this price point, they're probably just really basic three pin fans, but the fact is they come with fans.
Yes.
And they're pretty.
And at $65 for a case to come with 4 fans, 420 millimeter fans, even if they're just basic 120 millimeter fans, that's a deal in and of itself. But the value doesn't stop there.
No, it doesn't.
Because right now, it comes with a free gift. A Rosewell gaming keyboard and mouse combo. They call it a mechanical switch feel keyboard. It's a rubber dome keyboard, but it's RGB backlit. It has 9 programmable lighting effects with macro keys, and it's a 3200 DPI RGB LED mouse.
Nice.
3200 DPI is nothing to sneeze at. And that's normally a $28 value. So you're essentially getting, notice, this case is on sale right now for $65. It's normally a $99 case. And you're getting an additional $28 mouse and keyboard with it. So you're getting roughly $130 worth of stuff for $65.
Well, and honestly, even if you didn't have the mouse and keyboard at $65, that's a solid price point for this case.
Indeed.
It's a decent case, actually, when you look at it. The dimensions are very, very much like the Meshify C. But it's got solid airflow, so it's got that mesh front.
And
now,
here's here's a photo of a system built in it. It does have a tempered glass side panel. And the thing I like about it is that the front panel, it's not acrylic. It's mesh.
It can breathe.
It can breathe. There's a look at the inside without the tempered glass side panel on. You can see it has a nice PSU shroud. It has room for up to a 360 millimeter radiator in the front.
Yep.
And up to a 280 millimeter radiator in the top.
Oh, 280. I thought it could only fit a 240.
Well, let me check. I thought it said 280, but I could be wrong. You're right. It's two 120s, so that would be a 240.
Ah, okay.
But yeah, that's... Notice it comes with the 3 fans in the front, 1 in the back. You can add up to 2 more up top for what they call optimized airflow.
Well, it does say it can hold. That's kind of weird how they say it. So it says in the top they can hold 2 120s / 140. So maybe it can hold two 140s. But in my experience with a case of like this type of a compact dimension, it's what, 8.15 inches wide.
If we go down to the specs,
I don't know if there's enough clearance between the top of the case where it would meet the motherboard, if there's going to be enough clearance there for a 280. Probably a 240, you'd be safe in the top. That's also going to kind of depend on your RAM clearance too. Like if you have taller RAM, maybe not be looking at a top-mounted radiator.
apparently it can handle up to 240 millimeter fans on the top. So yeah, it can handle a 280 millimeter rad on the top. In theory.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out, but the internal layout is really, really solid.
So yeah, if you're looking for a solid case with some value added, this is a good option.
Don't forget to get front filters, though.
That is the one downside of the case. It's interesting. It has top and bottom filters, but it does not have front filter for the front mesh. So you got to make sacrifices somewhere at this price point, I guess.
Yeah, maybe. Solid case, though. Solid case.
Indeed. If you were interested by those Radeon Adrenaline drivers, then take a look. We have a couple of Radeon RX cards deals. The first one is for an MSI Radeon RX 580 8 gig. It has a very simple single fan blower style cooler, but it is on sale for $169.99 after a $30 rebate. But there's also an offer code that gets you an additional 15% off. Or excuse me, not 15%, $15 off for a final price of an RX 580 8 gigabyte card for $155.
That's a steal.
And remember, it is a new RX 580, so it is eligible for AMD's 2 free games offer. So you get 2 games of your choice from The Division 2, Devil May Cry 5, and the Resident Evil 2 remake.
Did you see how long this card was? It's less than 8 inches long, man.
Yeah, it's essentially a mini ITX card. It's not quite, but pretty close.
And it's got... So it's got a pseudo blower, kind of?
Yeah, the cooler on it is very basic. It's...
Yeah.
It's technically an axial fan, but given the way the shroud is put together, it almost acts like a blower.
Yeah, because it looks like it just puts the heat out of the case, so that's kind of another plus.
If you're going to use it in a small form factor system, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
I should probably be showing this card to our viewers.
Okay.
Here we are. So here's the card in question. As you can see, it is very short for a RX 580. And it does have the single axial fan. But again, if you take a look at the way the shroud's put together, you're not going to be exhausting a ton of heat into your case. It's not quite a reference design, but it's pretty close.
Mm-hmm. Wonder if it uses the reference PCB.
That would be a good question. I'm not sure how you'd find that out without doing some real deep dive.
Yeah, you'd have to do some digging, see if you could find like a PCB pick versus a reference PCB pick.
But
you can just kind of look over it.
You know, maybe a $155 RX 588 gig is not good enough for you. You want cheaper. Well, right now you can get a Sapphire Radeon RX 470 8 gig, which is one of their Nitro cards. That is a brown box, meaning that it is not going to be coming with all the normal fancy packaging. You're getting literally just the card for $129.
That's a steal.
And in this case, it does come with, it's obvious who Newegg was aiming this for. It comes with a Cove riser, basically for Bitcoin mining. But you know what? Those Cove risers like that can also be used for other applications. Like, for example, if you wanted to try the external GPU thing with your laptop, you can use those risers to do that. It doesn't always work very well, but since you're getting it free with the card anyway, why not try?
Yeah, it's true. The only downside to this card really is it comes with a DVI. That's it.
Well, that is the thing you run into with brown box cards like these, because as you can see, this was probably originally designed as a mining card.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a DVI-D monitor, this makes a solid upgrade.
Well, sometimes what you can do is you can remove that I/O. Sometimes you can replace those PCI brackets with a different I/O that's got more video out options, provided they've got the connections on the PCB. And many times,
true.
Now you'd have to do some soldering, but the potential is there to get something like that. Don't quote me on that for this particular card, but sometimes that is the case. You just basically unscrew the PCI bracket, look for one that's compatible with the PCB, take off the cooler, get your soldering iron ready, solder some stuff, and then boom, you've got some display out. So for this price though, man, this is a nice card.
Yeah, $130 for an RX 470 8 gig is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, what's that in NVIDIA terms? That's between a 1050 and a 1050 Ti in terms of performance, right?
More like between a 1050 Ti and a 1063 gig.
Oh, really? Okay. I knew that was the 570's case, but I didn't know about the 470.
The 470... The difference between the 470 and the 570 is really just down to clock speed. If you were able to crank up an RX 470 to the same speeds as an RX 570, you'll get similar performance. All right, last deal of the evening. This one also from Newegg. The recently released Crucial BX 500. Now, this is a budget drive. This is Crucial's version of what are called the DRAM-less SSDs. Essentially, this drive does not have a DRAM cache like its upscale sibling, the MX 500. However, that does not mean that it is a terrible drive. In fact, it's pretty solid. Tom's Hardware did a review very recently. The BX500 makes a solid data drive or a second SSD in your system, or it makes a budget upgrade for an older system that may have no SSD at all. And right now, you can get a 2.5-inch, 480 gigabyte SATA 3 SSD for $60.
Can't really, you can't really argue at that price point.
Now, admittedly, if you go down to the specifications, you'll see that the max read is 540 and the max write is 500. And the one thing you will notice is they do not publish IOPS numbers.
I wonder why.
Because this is a budget drive and IOPS numbers would not look good.
Ain't got no cash, folks.
However, in day-to-day usage, unless you're doing something really intensive, like writing huge amounts of data, you probably won't notice the difference.
Well, like you mentioned, like a game drive maybe, or a data drive, like a secondary drive, it'd be perfect for.
Or even a boot drive for an older machine.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, don't use this for like your scratch disk for your production machine. Don't use this as, the caching drive for your RAID array.
Or expect it to perform with an MX500 or an 860 Evo. I mean, as long as you've got realistic expectations. But
Indeed. Just be aware, for a $60 drive, to have 480 gigabytes of capacity, there's a sacrifice made somewhere.
So it'd be good for a laptop drive upgrade.
Yeah. It would probably be decently solid for that. If you have a old laptop that has only a hard drive, this would be a significant step up. And with that, we have reached the end of our show notes for this week. So, gentlemen, anything else you'd like to add?
Not really.
Only thing I'm going to add is if you're looking at EKWB and a Vega water block, be careful. Make sure to reach out to EKWB customer support before doing so. Just saying.
Well, gentlemen, thank you once again for joining me for this episode of TechForge. And ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed what you've seen here, then of course you can check out more of our great content in the playlist, or you can check out past episodes of TechForge. If you've enjoyed the gaming content here on CrossForge Gaming, you can check out some of those videos or see us over at our Twitch channel 5 nights a week, Monday through Friday. I've been Dynamo Ned. This has been TechForge. And remember, when life has you down, Jesus loves you, and forge on.